I personally am obsessed with the concept of success, and I don't want you to just be happy and in love. I want you to be super successful
and fulfilled.
But I don't want you to be at the top of the mountain and get divorced either. I don't want you to be at the top of the mountain and not in love.
And if you don't have self-regulation skills, that is going to make truth-telling and truth-sharing and vulnerable expression, especially when you have a history of avoiding conflict your whole life or getting bullied or whatnot. Like, conflict is the enemy when it comes to your central nervous system. It dysregulates the heck out of you. Conscious couples, business partners, and singles committed to attracting their dream partner. Welcome to the Conscious Couples podcast, where we share our life, love story, and combined relationship expertise to help you create and consistently cultivate the most magnificent, intimate relationship possible.
Never again will you feel hopeless and alone in relationship challenges.
Having accumulated thousands of hours coaching conscious couples and individuals all over the world, as well as starting and growing a global business together, Alan and I are here to guide you in all things relationships.
Thank you again for tuning into the one place where it's not about you or me, it's about the we. Conscious couples and individuals, welcome back to the one and only Conscious Couples podcast. Today we have an episode for you. As we do every week, every Monday, except for one time on a Tuesday. We're so sorry. Episode number 122, How to Prevent Destructive Patterns in Your Relationship. So Emilia has been studying this stuff since she was basically in the womb. And I learned so much. And so I learned something new today, which was really cool. I want to give a little backstory. So first, before we jump into this episode, number one, thank you, Next Level Podcast Solutions, for producing this show and so many others and bringing personal development, self-improvement, personal growth, mental health into the world, spreading it. Thank you. That is what the world desperately needs. In my opinion. It's not an opinion, it is a fact. Number two, sweetheart, what is your intention for today's episode? And then I want you to kick it back to me because I want to provide some context.
Great.
Okay, cool.
Okay, so my intention for today's episode is pretty simple. It is to help our listeners identify where the pattern is that is destructive in their relationship, and more importantly, to encourage them to activate this healthy, constructive pattern that we're going to get into in this topic for their relationship. So tell us a little bit about the backstory, love, for this episode.
So right before we recorded today, we did a little masterminding on what we wanted to bring to all of you on the Love Train, the Conscious Couples podcast. And we have a client who we've talked about many times anonymously that is on the hybrid model. So the hybrid model is I have one-on-one calls with the male, she has one-on-one calls with the female, and then we have one monthly 4-way session together where we're sharing all the things on this podcast, but at a deeper, more customized level. Okay, so if you don't know what Relationship Talks coaching is, if you're a new listener, it's everything you hear on this podcast, but entirely catered and customized to you. So before we did this episode, I said, sweetheart, you sent an audio message to the female in the relationship that I saw in WhatsApp, but I haven't had a chance to listen to it yet. What was that about? And you said it's about a digital asset that you sent about regulation. Can you go into what that digital asset was?
Yeah, absolutely. So the digital asset was really breaking down the 3 different types of regulation. And where this really came from was based off of a call in the hybrid model that I had with the female in that relationship, and hearing that some of the challenges that we've talked about in the 4-way call really came from one of this bigger root that I recognize, like, we need to really make sure that we equip them with, because I was under the assumption and impression that this was inherently there. And now I realize, because of you and I's conversation, that this is like the ABCs for me, but that's not the case for everyone. And
just so everyone's aware, I had never formally heard of these 3 breakdowns about regulation until today.
Right.
And so the fact that, and I've been studying a lot about emotional intelligence. I remember back when I would have challenges in my intimate relationships in my mid-20s, late 20s, I would go watch YouTube videos and take seminars on relationships. And I still never heard about this. So don't feel bad if you haven't.
Definitely. And this is I was telling Alan, like, this is such a fundamental principle. Like, it is one of the foundation blocks for relationships, being a human being in general. So what this really came down to was, I want everyone to like imagine a house. Every house has a foundation that is sturdy, right? And the foundation is comprised of different building blocks. And this building block that we're going to talk about in this episode is around the concept of regulation. And what that really means is when our bodies are in what's called a homeostasis, everything seems chill, everything seems good, everything is in flow, like we call. We're at peace, we're kind of tranquil.
I use centered.
Yeah.
You're very centered, upset. You're very at peace. You're your best self.
You're your best self. That's a great way to explain it. And so these foundational blocks that we're going to talk about, it helps you be that best self. And when this foundational block is not there, you cannot be your best self. And a lot of us, we were never taught this skill, this foundational block when it comes to just how we exist in the world. And I realized when I was in this call with this client that she nor her partner were ever taught these skills. And so I kind of took it back down to really the fundamental level that we're going to get into in today's episode. And I sent them a digital asset, which I had shared screen in the call. Which,
are we going to put the asset in the show notes?
I'm going to create a net new one that's more custom for our listeners, but yeah, let's do that. So the visual aid is there. So essentially what I did is I broke down, I asked her, have you ever heard about, self-regulation? And she's someone who is way more into, breath work and yogic practices and spirituality. And so she didn't really hear about it from the fundamental neuroscience and psychological standpoint, but how I would explain self-regulation is essentially the self-centering version when you're in an emotional upset and you feel frenetic energy in your body. How do you get yourself back into that best version of yourself, the centered, the regulated, where your energies are acting in alignment and in accordance with how you want to show up? A lot of us end up in relationships and we'll say things that we don't mean. We'll do things that we wish we didn't do. And a lot of that is a byproduct of not having the skill of self-regulating. So the digital asset broke down 3 different types of regulation. And I shared all 3 of them because what I realized is she and her partner are trying to co-regulate and they don't have the foundational skill of self-regulation. So let's start with the first one. The first one is called external regulation. So I want everyone to imagine a mother with their child. That's the image that I want you holding in your head. And Alan and I had talked about this in the episode where external regulation really boils down to someone cannot regulate themselves and they need an external person to be able to learn that skill. So that's why I said picture the mother and the child, because a child, a little baby, an infant, is screaming and crying, is having all of these physiological things happen in their body, digesting, burping, trying to figure out how to cry. Like they're trying trying not to be poopy butts. And so they're trying to navigate what it feels like to exist in their own little body. And they don't know the skill of self-regulation. So what do they need? They need someone else to teach them that skill. And that's where,
sounds like a lot of adults.
Honestly, a lot of us really need this skill revisited. And that's
anyone out there listening who still struggles with poopy butts. I'm kidding.
Well, that's where, we hear like soothing techniques, like a binky will come in, right? Or
blankie.
A blankie.
You had your banky?
I had my Genki.
Oh,
it was
Genki.
called. Yep.
Yeah.
Or you hear like different melodies or nighttime songs that are sung to babies.
Those little things that
Yep, there's so many different things. Yep.
Yeah, and that's why you have a baby monitor, so you can identify when the baby needs regulation.
Exactly, right? Exactly. And so like the image is literally like child to chest. That's where the skill of self-regulation is starting to be learned, because the mother, while she's putting the child to the chest, is literally having to go through her own self-regulation process, and through the mirror neurons, that child is starting to pick up on it. And so if the mother or the father or the caregiver isn't conscious of that, they might not be taking the steps necessary to teach how to self-regulate, because they're not doing it themselves.
Heated and we're having a passionate discussion, not at each other, but just about something in the world that I think is unjust, I'll get really intense and heated, and then our cats and dogs, Tucker, Tilly, Tau,
Yeah.
they'll start wrestling.
Right. Mirror neurons. They'll get freaked out because all their energies start to get discombobulated. And so like that's the external regulation. And that's why it's so freaking important from my perspective. Anyone that has children, anyone that has interactions with children, children are so impressionable, and we don't realize how much power we do have in that mirror neuron social learning aspect, where we need to embody those skill sets, because the little ones around us, whether it be your niece, your nephew, they're picking up on what skills you either have or don't have, what you've embodied or what you're not. So like I said to this client, and a lot of things started to click for her. She's like, oh yeah, I don't think I really learned self-regulation because of course, like I was raised by my family, but it's a very conscious, intentional practice that some parents, just because they're too stressed out, they're working multiple jobs, they're doing XYZ, they're not taking as conscious of a practice, especially as children age. So what happens when you go from an external regulator, so like a mom or a father, when you're crying, you cut your knee after you ride a bike and you're crying and you come and you just want consolation, that's the learning of external regulation, right? Someone coming from the outside to help you regulate. What happens when you start to grow up and you start to go into organized activities, sports, you start to go into school? What you learn is the second type of regulation, which you'll see in the digital asset, which is called co-regulation. And so we learn the skills, like I was telling you, babe, just before this episode, we learn how to co-regulate in a space with our peers.
Kind of connected to codependence, because codependent relationships require each other to regulate each other. Is there a fair
in an aspect of
we won't go down the rabbit hole, but I just made that connection now of makes sense.
Yeah. You actually become so dependent on that co-regulation that you don't learn this self-regulation tactic. That's the parallel there. So in organized sports like that,
to transcode that quickly, imagine a couple that needs each other versus a couple, and the whole hold on loosely but don't let go.
Yeah.
That's a really centered, I want to be with Emilia, but I don't need to be with Emilia, because if I need her, like I need oxygen, now I need her to be a certain way. Right. And when she's not around, I'm anxious and struggling to exist on my own accord. And so if you want a strong we, each me needs to be able to stand strong on its own.
Yes.
And it needs to be a win-win versus you have to be the way I need you to be.
Right. And that's the thing. We end up in those relationships when we don't learn how to self-regulate. So the co-regulation really comes from when you get in those organized sports or you're around your peers. Think about like the soccer team or the dance team that you were on, whatever space where there was peers your age and there was a influential adult who was trying to help the kids and your peers in this instance regulate themselves. Because what I mentioned to Alan earlier before this episode was, the ratio of student to teacher in general is probably around anywhere from 12 on like an organized sports team to like it can be 20, and so
20 to 1.
20 to 1, right? So one adult to 20 different
like
children.
30 or 40
it can
1.
be, absolutely.
And in college, it's even worse. Because I had some classes with 400 people in it.
Exactly. So this is that kind of organized group setting where you're learning how to kind of feed off of the regulation strategies of your peers. And again, it's a skill that they brought from their homes, learning from their caregivers. And so you might have gotten into an organized sports or a classroom where there was a lot of dysregulated kids, and picture the teacher at the front of the classroom and you have airplanes being thrown at each other like paper airplanes. You see just an absolute disarray. You can even picture like a movie scene or whatnot where the teacher just has zero, not even control, but zero compliance, zero respect, zero, like it's just complete disarray. And that's a byproduct of poor co-regulation between peers. Right. So everyone coming from their households that didn't learn how to regulate and bringing that into the classroom. And then you have.
So the extreme version of this would be someone who throws a hissy fit.
Yeah. even if their friend is like, hey, calm down, it's okay. Like,
Gotcha.
Trying to encourage their peer to
Or
like
fights
breathe or
breaking
whatever.
out.
Yep, exactly. So that's the co-regulation strategies. That the opportunity that's there is because we didn't necessarily have a ton of skill in this in our households. When we get into a group setting, the co-regulation, we can actually benefit from. I mean, how many of us have in the past had a really rough time and called up a friend and said, hey, I'm going through a rough time. I just literally got off the phone yesterday with a friend who's having a rough time and she needed to co-regulate. And I was the steady, the calm amongst her storm. And that's because I deploy self-regulation tactics and strategies in my day-to-day that I have enough to give to where her mirror neurons can mirror that when she's on the phone with me. So everyone has had likely an experience where they've really engaged with someone that they've benefited from. Their central nervous system starts to settle. The steam starts to roll off their back, whether that's talking to a friend or a colleague or a trusted partner or your family member, your therapist, your coach. That's where you can learn some co-regulation strategies that are more beneficial for you, especially if you come from a dysregulated household. So then the third aspect, and before I get to the third one, like I mentioned to the client, they're trying to co-regulate each other, her and her partner, when again, they don't have the foundation within themselves because they both came from a household of low skill set of self-regulation. So what I shared with her is, in order to get you and your partner to co-regulating, which is a wonderful state for you guys to be able to be in or leverage in your relationship, I really want to redirect both of your attentions, if I may, to the self-regulation strategy, which is the third aspect of this, which is you don't need your partner. You don't need outside people to regulate yourself. You actually learn the skill of regulating yourself.
A little over a year and a half ago, I attended my first relationship call with Alan and Emilia. And as a single mother, I was very curious what I was actually going to be able to take away from it. I was very blown away with how deep we could actually go in that first session alone. It really opened the doors and opened my eyes to a lot of my patterning and wounding around relationships. Through attending some of their live events and through work with them, I have really grown in confidence, in learning how to love and show up for myself, which has been huge. And it's really set the bar high when in terms of standards for relationships and what I desire and need out of a relationship. They very much practice what they preach, and it's so nice to see people working consciously on relationships. Again, it's really set the bar high for what I look for and what I desire in a relationship. So I'm super grateful to be able to learn and grow from them and be a part of this community.
And so what I shared with her is one of the most beneficial things that I could give to anyone. And she's someone who travels all over the world, just like her partner. So there's constant experiences that they're having that are encouraging already dysregulation in her body and in his body.
Travel is stressful.
Oh yeah. Anything that's stressful will dysregulate you, which is why this skill of self-regulation helps to destroy those destructive patterns in relationships, because naturally we're all going to be doing different things in our lives and over the course of our relationship. So this is a fundamental skill to learn how can you self-soothe? How can you emotionally regulate? How can you self-regulate amongst the storms of life? It is fundamental.
So I've told this story before. I just want to try to bring something really tangible for everybody. So if you're a long-term listener, you know that Emilia and I have talked often about how she said at the beginning of our relationship, we're never going to fight.
Yeah.
And I was like, that sounds impossible to me because I grew up with a mom and a stepdad that didn't self-regulate.
Yeah.
And they fought all the time. Mm-hmm. And I was like, that never? Is that possible? I can't be perfect. And that's what I said in my head is I can't be perfect, especially not in this, right? Given where I grew up.
Yeah.
And here we are almost 5 years later and we've never fought. We've had passionate, challenging moments and healthy discords, and we've definitely had debates, but it's never been no scream, no slam the door, no any of that, no physical aggression whatsoever.
No disrespect.
Now, the truth of the matter is, though, and I need to say this, it's because of Emilia's skill of self-regulation, because whenever I escalate, she'll be the one to self-regulate and then call it out.
Yeah.
And I always say, intuitively, it's because of you.
Yeah.
because I've never personally been able to have any relationship in my life where there wasn't ever any fights. There's never any disagreement or argument. With you, it's been magnificent. It's been like, how is this even possible, to be honest? But now I know why. It's because you have a skill that I would actually call a meta skill. And for those of you who don't know what a meta skill is, it's a skill underneath other skills. So when I say a meta skill, what I mean is if you can self-regulate in the pressure cooker of life's stresses, you can develop any other skill you want underneath that foundation that you're referring to. Absolutely. And so I just wanted to give everyone that, not to talk about us, but if you want to fight less in your relationship, this is where you go. Learn how to self-regulate, and then your partner will mirror you. Because whenever we've been heated or escalating, you've always self-regulated first. And there, instead of up the ante, you're the one who stops the train 99% of the time. And I tend to be the one who will go vulnerable after the train is almost off the tracks. So I take some credit for that too. But at the end of the day, vulnerability and self-regulation have got to be two of the most important skills in an intimate relationship, but they're in the me, not the we.
I agree. And such a valid point, love. And I'm really glad that you brought that up, because self-regulation it definitely is a meta skill. It's a meta strategy built within all of that. And the truth is, underneath that, we can't rationally think without self-regulation. Like, that's why the heat of the moment, we say things that we don't mean, we do things that we're not proud of. In the heat of the moment, you're literally just acting completely irrational. You're just in your emotions. And I don't say that to minimize our emotions. Our emotions are powerful, incredible things. However, the rationality that is accessible through self-regulation is far more accessible and at our readiness in our prefrontal cortex than it is when we live in the limbic system, the fight, flight, freeze, fawn state, which is usually where we shift into gears when we're out of dysregulation. And that's why I advocated for the same thing when it comes to our clients, is because this is so paramount of a principle to learn. If you hadn't really intentionally focused on that in your practice day to day in life, this is a skill that I do believe will help so many other skills be able to develop in your relationship. And one of them being what we had talked about, which was what kind of the challenge that we were getting through, was truth sharing your vulnerable truth. That is really difficult when we really zoom out. And if you don't have self-regulation skills, that is going to make truth telling and truth sharing and vulnerable expression, especially when you have a history of avoiding conflict your whole life or getting bullied or whatnot. Like, conflict is the enemy when it comes to your central nervous system. It dysregulates the heck out of you. And so,
especially if you don't believe in your ability to change.
Yeah. And that's a whole nother thing. So there's a lot that's underneath this, but ultimately the three self-regulation, or the three regulation things, are external regulation, co-regulation, and self-regulation. And it really starts with, you learn how to regulate through external regulation in your upbringing or not. And then you get in situations, which is called life, where you have the opportunity to co-regulate, right? In organized sports or in families or whatever. And it either builds up and improves that skill of self-regulation, or it destructs it. And then you kind of figure out how to navigate through life with a lack of this skill or an abundance of it. And I do want to put it on that binary spectrum, because I want to help our listeners to kind of ask the question and ask themselves, where do I fall on the self-regulation? Like 0 to 10. If I were to say 10 out of 10 is we've never fought, and that's attributed to the self-regulation skill sets that we have, and a 0 is I am always in destructive patterns. I feel like I've always had that in my relationships, and it likely ties back down to this lack of self-regulation skills. Where are our listeners at? Because having a baseline, like everything else that we talk about in these episodes, can really help them be more honest and more customized in their personal care around the me and therefore the we.
Okay, 2 quick things before we go here. Number 1, I realized, remember when Tauriel, our cat, she tried to get water at the bottom of a glass, and she stuck her whole head in when she was a little girl and broke the glass because she got her head stuck in it around her neck. That was one of the only times I've ever seen you not regulated.
Yeah, I wasn't. You were more regulated than I was, and I was so grateful for that, because you allowed me to go regulate, to like calm down.
Yeah. That was one of the only times that you've ever been really mistreating but I understand why. Totally fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that was
because I mistreated you in that moment. Well,
it's okay.
In hindsight, I was like, I need you to be effective.
Yeah,
I
you
said
were
that
yelling at me
because I was like trying to get the crown off of her, and it was a make or break moment where she slices her neck.
So she had shattered glass all around her neck. It was awful. But anyways, and Emilia didn't self-regulate. That's the only time I've ever seen you unregulated.
It was self-regulated.
Except for with the self-driving Tesla a little bit.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Babe, it was actually self-regulated. It was just so heightened on the need of efficacy that it didn't seem like self-regulated.
Okay. It was still self-regulated, but maybe not as well as I'm used to.
Yes.
From you.
Yes.
Okay, so that's the number one. Number two, and again, just to relate, everyone think about their own relationship and their own life. And when is my partner dysregulated?
Right.
When am I dysregulated? Very last piece of this is the constructive part. So you don't just want to break the destructive patterns. You want to identify them and then make them constructive.
Replace them.
I want to use me as an example and everyone think of themselves. So my old way of self-regulating used to be alcohol for a time. And I quit alcohol. It took me 5 years to quit drinking. I kept falling off every now and then. Weddings were my kryptonite. But I am now, I think, over 5 years. I mean, I used to count the days. I don't anymore. Thank you, sweetheart. So it's awesome. But now I've asked Emilia, what are our self-regulating go-tos? A lot of people use food.
Yes.
There's constructive ones and destructive ones. Food can be destructive. Alcohol can be destructive. Drugs can be destructive. Can be. Okay.
Yeah.
I don't want a blanket statement because I think some drugs can be useful if they're medically
same thing
whatever.
with food. That's why everything in moderation is such a
100%
siren of a statement.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so my top three, we came up with them lead by example. We want you to come up with your top three. So mine is, I don't want to say cold showers, but it's like semi-cold showers. It's not like the ice bath things that people do. I turn off the lights and I take a dark, now this is sensory deprivation. Yeah, sensory deprivation. If you've ever heard of float tanks, it's kind of like my own unique shower version of that. Okay.
Non-float
Number two is fitness. I always say, the weights don't get hurt. I can take out all my rage on the weights and the weights don't get hurt. That's awesome. So I've been using that as a tool for the last many, many years, 9 years.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Thank you. And then the other one was what? Learning. So I'll go to my books whenever I'm stressed out and I'm under the pressure cooker and I'm struggle bussing and I just need to find my center. I'll go to certain books that help me regulate. And so those are constructive versions. Some of the destructive versions were food, alcohol, escapism into movies or TV. I used to do that a lot.
Yeah.
And so if you identify your destructive ones and then your constructive ones, now you'll be more aware in the future of, oh, I'm just trying to self-regulate.
Yeah.
And so now you can trade your destructive patterns in for ones that are constructive that actually get you towards your goals, not farther away.
1,000%. And that's a lot of the thing, like the sneaky things that we'll do with clients without them even knowing, is we'll design their life and specifically their habits to kind of plot the peanuts in the path essentially of self-regulation. So my top three, like I had mentioned to the clients, and I'm glad you are closing with this because that was the action for our clients, was to identify your top three go-to, because when you can do that, you can practice. Like everything, it's a skill. You practice, you learn, you develop it. Okay, so my top three, like I had mentioned to that client, was number one is journaling out my thoughts. Anything that happens in solitude was number two. Usually it ends up being in nature, but I have this little area called quantum chasm. It can be there so long as it's an environment where I can be by myself, with myself, to really kind of center up. That is huge. And then number three, I said nature. Nature for me has always been my go-to.
So what was number
coping.
two, love?
Number two is solitude.
Oh, okay. So number one is journaling. Number two is solitude. Number three is nature.
Yep. And anything that I do within those.
You did this morning, journal in solitude, in nature.
That's why I'm such
Although Tucker was with
sunshine. Flower.
Yeah, it's great.
Yes.
Okay, thank you all so much for listening. Your homework is, number one, check out the digital asset if you're not driving in the show notes. Number two is find your top three best practices, constructive, for self-regulation. Look at your past, see what worked well, what didn't. We all have our own unique flavor. Also, if you want to book a Relationship Talks coaching session, which is everything you've ever learned on this podcast, but specific to you. This is where the real work is done.
The best.
We can talk high-level theory, but this is where we put it into practice. And we will hold you super accountable to an extent that if you struggle to implement these things, you and your partner, we're going to hold you accountable. We're going to make sure that you do. We give homework assignments after every call. and we make sure that you get results. One of our clients got married and is planning an engagement party, got engaged, planning an engagement party, planning a wedding, bought a new house. I mean,
got a new job,
huge
pay raise.
Yeah,
so many different
unbelievable.
things.
And so the truth of the matter is this is not just to make your relationship flourish. This is to help you achieve your goals and dreams together. I personally am obsessed with the concept of success, and I don't want you to just be happy and in love. I want you to be super successful
and fulfilled.
But I don't want you to be at the top of the mountain and get divorced either. I don't want you to be at the top of the mountain and not in love. I told Emilia that too. I said, listen, I don't want to be at the top of our success mountain not in love. And so how do you have success and love? How do you have ambition and love? And that's what Relationship Talks coaching is all about.
In the show notes as well will be our next invite to you for our 36th event. This is going to be our monthly free Relationship Talks event. It is free, it is live, and it is lots of fun. So join us there. The topic will be actually around the whole theme of conflict, which is so essential to be able to navigate through in a relationship. And this is also a skill. So we're going to be getting into the 3 phases of conflict that you must learn. And this will help you walk away or click away from that event, learning how to navigate conflict in a really adaptive and constructive manner. So whether you're on the road, whether you're with your kids, this is a wonderful event for you, conscious couples and conscious singles, to join and to really be around incredible people who are all about the love train. So we hope to see you there.
There's an idea called anti-fragile, where the more something tries to be torn down, the more something gets attacked, the more something meets adversity, the stronger it gets. We want your relationship to be resilient and adaptive, and conflict can actually make it stronger. We call it cutting strings and then weaving a rope that's even stronger than the strings were before. And we've done that in our relationship over the years, something that gets stronger and more meaningful over time, not what we've all experienced in the past. I certainly have, of I don't even know how to remend this thing. We have really screwed this relationship up. I've been in that place in the past where it's, I don't even know if this is worth it anymore. I don't even know if we can repair this. I mean, whoa, that sucks. So if you feel like you're there, trust me, you haven't done all you can. Come to this event, book Relationship Talks coaching. And as always, thank you again for listening. It's not about you or me. It's about the we. We'll talk to you next time.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Conscious Couples podcast. We love connecting with the Conscious Couples community, so please make sure you follow us on Instagram. I am at Evolve with Emilia, and Alan is a Lazaros 88.
Also, if you or your partner resonated with this episode, leave us a review at the link in the show notes, and please share this with someone you love and care about.
Until next time, remember, it's not about you or me. It's about
the we.